The morning mist hung heavy over Pine Valley as Sarah Martinez stepped out of her modest rental car, adjusting the worn baseball cap that had become her daily disguise. To everyone in this small mountain town, she was simply Sarah, the quiet woman who had moved here 6 months ago, claiming to be a freelance writer seeking inspiration in the wilderness. What they didn't know was that Admiral Sarah Elena Martinez was one of the most decorated officers in the United States Navy, currently on the most classified mission of her career. At 42, Sarah had spent over 2 decades climbing the ranks of the Navy SEALs, breaking barriers as one of the first women to achieve such heights in the elite force. Her official record showed numerous commendations, but her classified files told a different story entirely. For the past 3 years, she had been leading a covert operation tracking an international arms trafficking ring that had connections reaching into the highest levels of government and military. The trail had gone cold in Washington, but intelligence suggested the operation's nerve center was hidden somewhere in the remote mountains of Pine Valley. Sarah's cover was perfect. She had rented a small cabin on the outskirts of town, established herself as a reclusive but friendly neighbor, and slowly integrated into the community. She volunteered at the local animal shelter, helped elderly Mrs. Henderson with her grocery shopping, and even joined the weekend hiking group. To the townspeople, she was healing from a difficult divorce, using writing as therapy while she figured out her next steps in life. The reality was far more complex. Every morning, Sarah would head out for her writing walks in the mountains, but instead of seeking inspiration, she was conducting surveillance, mapping terrain, and gathering intelligence on suspicious activities in the area. Her laptop, which neighbors assumed contained her novel drafts, was actually equipped with military-grade encryption software and satellite communication systems that kept her connected to naval intelligence. Tom Bradley, the town's sheriff, had become particularly protective of Sarah. A widower in his late 40s with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor, he had noticed her quiet struggles and made it his personal mission to help her feel welcome. He would stop by her cabin to check on her, invite her to town events, and share stories about the area's history during their chance encounters at Murphy's General Store. Sarah found herself genuinely touched by Tom's kindness, but also conflicted. Building relationships while undercover was always complicated, but there was something about Tom's authentic concern that made her feel guilty about the deception. He represented everything good about small-town America that she had spent her career protecting. Yet here she was, lying to his face every day. The arms trafficking ring she was tracking had been responsible for weapons flowing to terrorist organizations across 3 continents. Her intelligence suggested they were using the remote mountain areas around Pine Valley as a storage and transfer point, taking advantage of the sparse population and difficult terrain to move their cargo undetected. What made this case particularly urgent was evidence that they had obtained classified military technology, including advanced guidance systems that could turn conventional weapons into precision-guided munitions. Sarah's days fell into a careful routine. She would wake before dawn, conduct her morning reconnaissance while the town slept, return home to file encrypted reports, then emerge later as the cheerful writer neighbor everyone had grown to care about. She shopped for groceries, attended church socials, and even helped organize the annual Pine Valley Fall Festival. The deeper she integrated into the community, the more she realized how much she had missed having a normal life. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, one of the most elite warriors in the world, finding peace in baking cookies for the church fundraiser and listening to Mrs. Henderson's stories about her late husband's service in Korea. For the first time in years, Sarah was sleeping through the night without nightmares from her combat deployments. The mountain air, the genuine friendships she was forming, and the simple rhythm of small-town life were healing wounds she hadn't even realized she carried. But her mission remained paramount. Recent intelligence chatter had indicated that a major weapons transfer was planned for some time in the next month. Her handlers in Washington were growing impatient for results, and Sarah knew that her time in Pine Valley was limited. The thought of leaving had begun to cause her unexpected pain, not just because of the unfinished mission, but because she would be abandoning people who had become important to her. Dr. Elena Vasquez, who ran the local medical clinic, had become particularly close to Sarah. The two women had bonded over their shared love of hiking and their experiences as professionals in male-dominated fields. Elena often invited Sarah for dinner, and their conversations about life, dreams, and challenges had become some of Sarah's most treasured moments. Elena was brilliant, compassionate, and represented the kind of friendship Sarah had never allowed herself to have due to the demands of her military career. The hiking group had also become central to Sarah's cover and, unexpectedly, to her happiness. Led by retired park ranger Joe Collins, the group included a diverse mix of locals and occasional tourists. There was Martha, a retired teacher who could identify every wildflower in the mountains. David, a young father who used the weekend hikes as his escape from the stresses of running his family's struggling farm. And Rebecca, a college student home for the summer who saw the group as her link to the outdoor adventure she craved. These people had embraced Sarah without question, sharing their favorite trails, their personal struggles, and their deep love for the mountains that surrounded their community. She found herself looking forward to the Saturday morning hikes more than any mission briefing she had ever attended. The irony was profound. She had come to Pine Valley to hunt dangerous criminals, but she had found something she hadn't even known she was searching for, a sense of belonging. As autumn approached, Sarah's investigation was finally yielding results. She had identified several properties in the mountains that showed signs of unusual activity. Remote cabins with sophisticated security systems, access roads that seemed unnecessarily well-maintained for their apparent isolation, and patterns of vehicle movement that didn't match typical recreational or residential use. Her surveillance equipment had detected radio transmissions using frequencies and encryption patterns consistent with the trafficking organization she was pursuing. The challenge was gathering concrete evidence without blowing her cover. Her military training had prepared her for combat operations and covert infiltration, but maintaining a civilian identity while conducting a complex investigation required different skills. Every move had to be carefully calculated to avoid suspicion from both the criminals she was hunting and the innocent townspeople who had become her friends. Sarah's internal conflict was growing stronger each day. She had joined the Navy to serve her country and protect innocent people, but now she was lying to innocent people in service of that same mission. The cognitive dissonance was wearing on her, especially when she saw the genuine care in Tom's eyes when he asked about her writing progress, or when Elena invited her to be her +1 at her cousin's wedding. The emotional complexity deepened when Sarah realized that her feelings for these people had transcended the professional concern of a protector for those she served. She genuinely cared about Mrs. Henderson's arthritis, worried about David's farm facing foreclosure, and felt proud when Rebecca decided to major in environmental science after their conversations about conservation during their hikes. These weren't abstract citizens she was protecting anymore. They were friends whose trust she was betraying with every smile and every lie. The mission parameters began to shift when Sarah's handlers informed her that they had intelligence suggesting the trafficking operation was planning to accelerate their timeline. The weapons transfer that had been scheduled for later in the month was now expected within the next 2 weeks. This meant Sarah would need to take more aggressive surveillance actions, potentially exposing herself to discovery by either the criminals or the community members who had become so important to her. As Sarah prepared for the next phase of her operation, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The peaceful life she had built in Pine Valley, even though it was based on deception, had given her a glimpse of who she might be outside of her military identity. For the first time in her career, she found herself questioning whether the mission was worth the cost. Not to her personally, but to the innocent people who would inevitably be hurt when the truth came out. The weight of her dual existence was becoming unbearable. Every genuine laugh shared with her hiking group, every concerned conversation with Tom, every moment of real connection with Elena was simultaneously the most meaningful and most painful part of her day. She was living the life she had always protected, but never allowed herself to have, and she knew it couldn't last. Standing on her cabin porch that evening, looking out over the mountains she had grown to love, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She would complete her mission, but she would also find a way to protect the community that had given her so much. She owed them that much, even if they would never know what they had given her in return. The next morning would bring new challenges, and Sarah knew that the careful balance she had maintained was about to be shattered. But for this moment, surrounded by the peace of Pine Valley and the memory of genuine human connection, she allowed herself to feel something she hadn't experienced in years, the possibility that she might be more than just a weapon in service of her country. She might actually be a person worthy of the love and friendship she had found in this unexpected place. The morning Sarah had been dreading arrived with unseasonable warmth and crystal-clear skies. She woke to her encrypted phone buzzing with an urgent message from Naval Intelligence. The weapons transfer had been moved up to that very day. Satellite imagery showed increased activity at one of the remote properties she had been monitoring, and electronic surveillance had picked up communications indicating that a major shipment would be moving through the mountains before sunset. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she read the briefing. After months of careful investigation, everything was coming to a head exactly when she was least prepared emotionally. Today was also the day of the Pine Valley Fall Festival, an event she had helped organize and one that the entire community had been anticipating for weeks. The festival represented everything she had grown to love about this place. Neighbors helping neighbors, traditions that connected generations, and the simple joy of a community celebrating together. Her mission orders were clear: conduct final surveillance, identify the exact transfer location, and coordinate with the tactical team that was already in position 20 miles away. Once she confirmed the location and timing, Navy SEALs and federal agents would move in to intercept the weapons and arrest the trafficking network. Her role would be complete, and Admiral Sarah Martinez would fade away, leaving behind only the memory of a quiet writer who had briefly called Pine Valley home. But Sarah couldn't shake the image of Elena excitedly showing her the decorations they had made for the festival booth, or Tom's proud smile when he talked about how this year's festival was shaping up to be the best in decades. The timing felt like a cruel joke from the universe, forcing her to choose between her duty and her heart on a day that symbolized everything she would be leaving behind. As Sarah prepared her equipment for what would likely be her final surveillance mission, she reflected on how much her life had changed in these mountains. The woman who had arrived 6 months ago was a decorated but emotionally isolated warrior, defined entirely by her service and her mission. The person she had become in Pine Valley was someone she barely recognized, someone who laughed easily, who looked forward to quiet conversations over coffee, who had learned the names of wildflowers and local birds not for tactical advantage, but for the simple joy of understanding her environment. Her first stop was the surveillance post she had established in an abandoned fire tower deep in the mountains. The tower provided an excellent view of the property where intelligence suggested the weapons transfer would occur, but reaching it required a challenging hike that would normally take her away from town for most of the day. Today, that hike felt like a walk to her own execution. The property in question was a seemingly abandoned mining operation about 8 miles from town. Sarah had been monitoring it for weeks, noting the sophisticated security measures that seemed excessive for a defunct business, the occasional delivery trucks that arrived under cover of darkness, and the electronic signatures that suggested much more activity than was visible to the naked eye. Today, her equipment was picking up significantly increased radio chatter and vehicle movement. As Sarah climbed toward the tower, her mind wandered to the conversations she had shared with her hiking group about these very trails. Joe Collins had told her about the history of mining in the area, how the mountains had once been filled with workers and machinery, but how most operations had shut down decades ago due to depleted resources and environmental concerns. The irony that criminals were now using this abandoned industrial landscape to threaten the peaceful community below was not lost on her. Through her high-powered surveillance equipment, Sarah could see vehicles arriving at the mining site. Black SUVs with tinted windows, a large truck that could easily accommodate weapons shipments, and several men who moved with the disciplined precision that suggested military training. Her worst fears were being confirmed. This wasn't just a criminal organization, but one with significant resources and professional capabilities. As Sarah documented the scene and prepared to call on the coordinates for the tactical strike, her radio crackled with an unexpected transmission. It wasn't from her Navy handlers, but from the Pine Valley emergency frequency. Tom's voice, strained and urgent, filled the small space of the fire tower. All available personnel, we have a missing person situation. Elena Vasquez failed to return from her morning hike. Last seen heading toward the old mining trails. We're organizing a full search immediately. Sarah's blood ran cold. Elena was missing, and, according to Tom's description, she had been heading in the direction of the very property where the weapons transfer was taking place. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Either Elena had stumbled upon something she shouldn't have seen, or she had been taken deliberately. Either way, Sarah's friend was in danger, and the situation had just become exponentially more complicated. The professional side of Sarah's brain immediately began calculating options. She could call on the tactical strike as planned, but if Elena was somewhere in the area, she could be caught in the crossfire. She could abort the mission to help with the search, but that would mean allowing dangerous weapons to slip through their fingers and potentially losing months of investigation. Or she could try to do both, locate Elena and neutralize the threat, but that would mean revealing her true identity and capabilities. As Sarah wrestled with this impossible choice, more details came through on the emergency radio. Elena's car had been found parked at the trailhead that led toward the mining property. Her medical bag was still in the vehicle, suggesting she hadn't planned to be gone long. Most troubling, there were signs of a struggle near the car. Disturbed ground, broken vegetation, and what appeared to be tire tracks from a vehicle that had stopped suddenly. Sarah's military training told her that Elena had been taken, likely because she had seen something that compromised the weapons transfer operation. The criminals had escalated from trafficking weapons to kidnapping an innocent civilian, and that changed everything. This was no longer just about completing a mission. It was about saving someone she cared about from people who would not hesitate to kill to protect their operation. The search and rescue operation was being coordinated from the town hall, with Tom directing volunteers and coordinating with state police. Sarah could hear the fear in his voice as he organized search teams and established communication protocols. The entire town was mobilizing to find Elena, and Sarah realized with painful clarity that these people she had grown to love were about to walk into extreme danger. Among the voices on the radio, Sarah recognized David volunteering to search the eastern trails, despite his lack of experience with the more challenging mountain terrain. Martha was offering to coordinate supply distribution for the search teams. Rebecca was planning to document the search areas to avoid duplication of effort. Joe Collins was providing detailed knowledge of the mountain trail systems. All of these people Sarah cared about were preparing to put themselves at risk to save their friend, completely unaware that they were walking toward armed criminals. Sarah made her decision. She couldn't allow the people of Pine Valley to face this danger unprepared, and she couldn't abandon Elena to criminals who had already demonstrated their willingness to use violence. But she also couldn't abort a mission that would prevent dangerous weapons from reaching terrorists. She would have to find a way to do everything: save Elena, protect the search volunteers, and complete her mission. Using her encrypted communication system, Sarah contacted her handler with a modified plan. Instead of a massive tactical strike that could endanger civilians, she requested a smaller, more precise operation. She would infiltrate the mining site herself, locate and extract Elena, and gather final intelligence on the weapons operation. Once she had Elena safe and the civilians clear, the tactical team could move in for the arrest and seizure operation. Her handler was reluctant to approve such a dangerous modification to the mission plan. Sarah was a valuable intelligence asset, and sending her into a hostile situation without backup was not standard protocol. But Sarah's argument was compelling. She was the only person in position who understood both the tactical situation and the civilian complications. She was trained for exactly this kind of operation, and she had the best chance of extracting Elena without causing a firefight that could endanger the search and rescue volunteers. As Sarah prepared to descend from the fire tower and infiltrate the mining site, she took one last look toward Pine Valley. The festival preparations were visible even from this distance. Colorful banners strung between buildings, booths being set up in the town square, and people moving with the excited energy of a community celebration. It was exactly the kind of scene she had spent her career protecting, but she had never before understood how precious such normalcy truly was. The irony of her situation struck her with full force. She had come to Pine Valley as Admiral Sarah Martinez, one of the most elite warriors in the world, but she had found her humanity as Sarah, the quiet writer who baked cookies and worried about her friends. Now, to save the life that had given her so much meaning, she would have to become the warrior again. The woman who had found peace in these mountains was about to wage war to protect it. Sarah began her descent toward the mining site, her mind shifting into the tactical mode that had made her such an effective SEAL commander. She inventoried her equipment, surveillance gear that could be repurposed for infiltration, emergency medical supplies, and the personal protection weapon she always carried but had hoped never to use in Pine Valley. She wasn't equipped for a full assault operation, but she had enough to get Elena out alive. As she moved through the forest toward the mining property, Sarah could hear the search and rescue operation mobilizing behind her. Vehicles were leaving town, volunteers were gathering equipment, and the entire community was rallying to save one of their own. The knowledge that she was moving toward danger while her friends searched for Elena in the wrong direction felt like betrayal, but Sarah knew that keeping them away from the real danger was the only way to protect them. The mining site came into view through the trees, and Sarah's worst fears were confirmed. This was a major operation with sophisticated equipment, multiple vehicles, and armed personnel who were clearly on high alert. Elena was here somewhere, but extracting her would require every skill Sarah had developed in 2 decades of special operations. The quiet rider was about to disappear forever, replaced by the warrior who would do whatever was necessary to protect the people she loved. As Sarah began her final approach to the site, she whispered a promise to Elena, to Tom, to the entire community of Pine Valley. She would bring Elena home safely, and she would make sure that this threat never touched their peaceful town again. The mission had become personal in a way that changed everything, and Admiral Sarah Martinez was prepared to use every weapon in her arsenal to protect the place that had taught her what she was truly fighting for. The abandoned mining site sprawled across a mountain plateau like a scar on the landscape. Sarah approached from the northeast, using the natural cover of dense pine trees and rocky outcroppings to mask her movement. Through her surveillance scope, she could see the operation in detail, a sophisticated network of armed personnel, advanced communication equipment, and enough firepower to outfit a small army. This wasn't just a weapons transfer. It was a major hub for international arms trafficking. Elena's yellow hiking jacket was visible through a window of what appeared to be the main administrative building. Sarah's heart clenched as she observed her friend tied to a chair, clearly frightened but apparently unharmed. 2 armed guards were posted outside the building, and Sarah could see at least 6 more personnel moving around the site. The weapons transfer was in its final stages, with crates being loaded onto a large truck under the supervision of a man who clearly held authority over the operation. Sarah activated her communication system and began relaying critical intelligence to her handlers. The scale of this operation exceeded all previous estimates. She identified advanced missile guidance systems, military-grade explosives, and communication equipment that appeared to be stolen from U.S. military sources. This wasn't just about stopping a weapons transfer. They had uncovered a major national security threat that had been operating undetected in the American heartland. While documenting the scene, Sarah's radio crackled with updates from the search and rescue operation. Tom was coordinating 3 search teams, each heading toward different sections of the mountain trail system. The volunteers were moving closer to the mining site with each passing hour, completely unaware of the danger they were approaching. David's team was already within 2 miles of the perimeter, and Joe Collins was leading another group along a trail that would bring them within sight of the operation before sunset. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Sarah's tactical assessment indicated that if the search teams encountered the criminals, the resulting confrontation would be a massacre. The volunteers were well-meaning civilians with basic outdoor equipment, while the traffickers were professional criminals with military-grade weapons and training. Sarah had to act quickly to extract Elena and neutralize the threat before her friends walked into a death trap. Sarah spent precious minutes studying the site layout and guard rotations, looking for a weakness she could exploit. The mining operation's industrial infrastructure provided both challenges and opportunities. The old machinery and abandoned buildings offered concealment, but the open areas between structures left her exposed. The criminals had chosen their location well, with clear sight lines and easily defensible positions. Her opportunity came when she noticed a pattern in the guard rotations. Every 20 minutes, both guards at Elena's building would move to the eastern perimeter for a brief coordination meeting with the perimeter team. During those 3-minute windows, the building was unguarded except for Elena herself. Sarah would have one chance to infiltrate, extract Elena, and escape before the guards returned. As Sarah prepared for the infiltration, her encrypted phone buzzed with a message that changed everything. Intelligence intercepts had revealed that this wasn't just a weapons transfer. It was the final phase of a plot to smuggle advanced military technology out of the country. The guidance systems being loaded onto that truck could be used to turn conventional rockets into precision-guided weapons capable of devastating civilian targets. If this shipment left Pine Valley, American military technology would soon be in the hands of terrorists across 3 continents. The weight of responsibility threatened to overwhelm Sarah. She was one person trying to save her friend, protect innocent volunteers, and prevent a national security catastrophe. But her Navy SEAL training had prepared her for exactly this kind of impossible situation. She compartmentalized her emotions, focused on her immediate objectives, and began moving toward Elena's location. The infiltration required every skill Sarah had developed in 2 decades of special operations. She moved through the mining site like a ghost, using industrial equipment for cover and timing her movement to avoid guard positions. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was using the same stealth skills she had taught to countless Navy SEALs, but this time to save someone who had become family to her. Reaching Elena's building undetected, Sarah positioned herself near a side window and waited for the next guard rotation. When the 2 guards moved toward their coordination point, Sarah had her window. She picked the lock on a rear door, a skill learned during covert operations in hostile territory, and slipped inside the building. Elena's eyes widened in shock when Sarah appeared beside her chair. "Sarah, how did you find me? What are you doing here?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from stress and dehydration. Sarah quickly cut Elena's restraints while explaining that she would answer all questions once they were safe. Elena was weak but mobile, and Sarah could see the determination in her friend's eyes that had made her such an excellent doctor. As they prepared to leave the building, Elena grabbed Sarah's arm. "There's something else," she whispered urgently. "I heard them talking. They're not just moving weapons. They have some kind of biological material in those containers. Something they stole from a government laboratory. They were joking about how much certain groups would pay for it." Sarah's blood ran cold. If the trafficking operation had obtained biological weapons or dangerous pathogens, the threat level had just escalated beyond anything she had imagined. This was no longer just about conventional weapons. They were dealing with materials that could cause mass casualties on an unprecedented scale. The mission parameters had changed completely, and Sarah knew that stopping this operation had become a matter of preventing potential genocide. The extraction from the building went smoothly, but as Sarah and Elena reached the tree line, disaster struck. David's search team appeared on a ridge overlooking the mining site, clearly visible to the criminal operation below. Sarah watched in horror as the traffickers immediately spotted the civilian volunteers and began mobilizing their armed personnel. David and his 3 companions had just walked into the exact nightmare scenario Sarah had been trying to prevent. Over the radio, Sarah heard David's confused voice. "Tom, we found some kind of industrial operation up here. Doesn't look abandoned like it's supposed to be. There are people with guns, and they're pointing them at us." The fear in his voice was clear, but also the bewilderment of an innocent person who couldn't comprehend why anyone would want to hurt him. Tom's response was immediate and decisive. "Get out of there now. All teams, we have a hostile situation. Return to base immediately." But Sarah could see that it was too late. The traffickers were already moving to surround David's position, and the volunteers had no escape route that wouldn't expose them to gunfire. Elena looked at Sarah with growing understanding. "You're not a writer, are you?" she asked quietly. Sarah's equipment, her confident movement through hostile territory, and her ability to appear in the middle of a criminal operation weren't the skills of someone who spent their days crafting fiction. Elena was a smart woman, and the evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. "No," Sarah admitted, her voice heavy with the weight of months of deception. "I'm not a writer, but everything else about our friendship is real. Elena, I need you to trust me. Can you make it to the main road on your own? There should be search teams coming from that direction who can get you to safety." Elena studied Sarah's face for a long moment. Despite the fear, the confusion, and the betrayal she must have been feeling, Elena nodded. "Go help them," she said simply. "Whatever you really are, David, and those volunteers need you more than I do right now." Sarah felt a surge of emotion that threatened to break her professional composure. Even in this moment of revelation and danger, Elena was thinking about others first. It was exactly the kind of selfless courage that had made Sarah fall in love with this community, and it reinforced her determination to protect these people at any cost. Sarah handed Elena her emergency GPS beacon and communication device. "Follow the trail markers toward town. When you get a signal, call Tom and tell him to keep all search teams away from this area. Tell him there are federal agents handling the situation." It wasn't exactly the truth, but it was close enough to keep the volunteers safe. As Elena headed toward safety, Sarah began moving toward David's position. She could see the traffickers closing in on the volunteers, who were trapped on a rocky outcropping with no cover and no escape route. David was trying to shield his companions, but they were civilians with no training for this kind of situation. They were completely helpless against armed professionals. Sarah's tactical assessment was grim. She was one person against at least 8 armed criminals, with 4 innocent civilians in the line of fire. She had limited ammunition and no backup, but she also had 2 decades of experience in exactly this kind of impossible situation, and she had never failed to protect innocent lives when it mattered most. As Sarah prepared to engage multiple armed hostiles to protect people she cared about, she realized that this moment represented everything her military career had been building toward. Not the medals, not the promotions, not even the classified missions that had protected national security. This was about using her skills to save specific people she loved in a place that had become home to her. Sarah checked her weapons, calculated distances and angles, and began moving into position. Admiral Sarah Martinez was about to reveal herself to save the lives of people who had given her more happiness than any military commendation ever had. The quiet rider was gone forever, but the person Sarah had become in Pine Valley would fight with everything she had to protect the community that had taught her what she was truly fighting for. The battle for Pine Valley was about to begin, and Sarah Martinez would use every skill she had learned in 20 years of special operations to make sure that the people she loved went home safely to their families. The mission had become personal, and that made her more dangerous than any enemy these traffickers had ever faced. Sarah moved through the rocky terrain with deadly precision, every step calculated to bring her closer to David's trapped position while remaining invisible to the armed traffickers. Her mind had shifted into the tactical mode that had made her legendary among Navy SEALs, but her heart carried the weight of protecting people she had come to love as family. This wasn't just another mission anymore. It was the fight of her life for the life she had found. The traffickers were professional, but they had made a critical error. They assumed they were dealing with lost hikers rather than someone with advanced military training. Their positioning was designed to intimidate and control civilians, not to defend against a special operations assault. Sarah used this advantage to systematically neutralize the perimeter guards, moving like a shadow through terrain she had studied for months. Her first target was positioned behind a boulder overlooking David's group. Sarah approached from his blind spot, using a technique she had perfected in counterterrorism operations. The guard was unconscious before he could raise an alarm, his radio and weapon secured. Sarah's movements were so precise and silent that the other traffickers remained unaware that their perimeter had been compromised. Through her tactical earpiece, Sarah could hear the growing panic in the criminal operation. The leader was demanding to know why his perimeter guards weren't responding to radio calls. The weapons transfer had been halted, and additional armed personnel were being deployed to investigate the disturbance. What had been an organized criminal enterprise was rapidly deteriorating into chaos. Sarah's second target was more challenging, a sniper positioned on elevated ground with clear sight lines over the entire area. Reaching his position required crossing open ground that would expose her to observation, but Sarah had trained for exactly this scenario in dozens of combat environments. She used the natural contours of the mining site, moving during moments when the sniper's attention was focused elsewhere. The sniper's elimination was textbook special operations, swift, silent, and decisive. Sarah secured his high-powered rifle and communication equipment, giving her both a tactical advantage and intelligence about the criminal organization's coordination. From the elevated position, she could see the full scope of the weapons transfer operation and identify the key personnel she needed to neutralize. David's voice crackled over the radio, strained with fear but trying to maintain calm for his companions. "Tom, I don't think these people are going to let us leave. They keep talking about not leaving witnesses. We need help up here." The desperation in his voice reinforced Sarah's determination to end this situation quickly and decisively. Sarah's tactical assessment identified the operation's weak point. The criminal leader was coordinating everything from a central command position near the main truck. If she could neutralize him and create sufficient chaos, the remaining personnel would likely retreat rather than risk a prolonged firefight. But reaching that position would require crossing the most heavily defended area of the site. Her opportunity came when Elena's escape was discovered. The leader pulled most of his remaining personnel back toward the administrative building, leaving only 2 guards watching David's group. Sarah used the distraction to move closer to the volunteer's position, timing her approach to coincide with the criminal's redeployment. "David," Sarah called out softly from behind a nearby rock formation. "It's Sarah from the hiking group. I'm going to get you out of this, but I need you to trust me and do exactly what I say." David's relief was audible even through his whisper. "Sarah, how did you get here? Are you armed? These people have serious weapons." His confusion was understandable. The quiet rider he knew didn't seem like someone who could navigate a hostage situation, but Sarah's confident tone and tactical knowledge were becoming impossible to ignore. Sarah quickly briefed David on the extraction plan. During her next diversion, he and his companions would move to a predetermined rally point where Sarah had cached additional communication equipment. From there, they could coordinate their escape with the search and rescue teams while Sarah dealt with the remaining threats. The diversion Sarah created was devastating to the criminal operation. Using the captured sniper rifle and her knowledge of the site's layout, she systematically disabled the communications array, destroyed the weapons transfer truck, and created multiple explosion points that convinced the traffickers they were under attack by a full tactical team. The precision of her strikes made it clear that they were facing a professional military operator, not random interference. As planned, David's group successfully reached the rally point during the chaos. Sarah had positioned emergency supplies and communication equipment there during her previous surveillance operations, anticipating that she might need to coordinate civilian evacuations. David immediately contacted Tom with their location and status, reporting that they were safe, but that the situation was far more serious than anyone had realized. Tom's response revealed the scope of the emergency response that was mobilizing. State police, federal agents, and military personnel were converging on Pine Valley. Elena had successfully reached safety and briefed the authorities on both the weapons operation and Sarah's mysterious involvement. The quiet mountain town was becoming the center of a major federal operation. But Sarah's mission was far from complete. The biological weapons Elena had mentioned were still unaccounted for, and several members of the trafficking organization had retreated to a fortified position in the main mining complex. These weren't just criminals anymore. They were cornered terrorists with weapons of mass destruction, and they had demonstrated their willingness to kill innocent civilians. Sarah's assault on the main complex required every skill she had developed in 20 years of special operations. The traffickers had barricaded themselves in the old mining office, using industrial equipment and steel-reinforced walls to create a defensive position. They had also taken defensive positions that suggested they were prepared for a prolonged siege. The breakthrough came when Sarah identified the complex's ventilation system. The old mining operation had extensive air circulation tunnels that connected different parts of the facility. Using blueprints she had studied during her surveillance, Sarah was able to infiltrate the complex from an unexpected direction, emerging behind the criminals' defensive perimeter. The final confrontation was swift and decisive. Sarah had trained extensively in close-quarters combat, and the confined spaces of the mining complex favored her skills over the criminals' superior numbers. She methodically cleared each room, securing the biological weapons containers and neutralizing threats while avoiding damage to the dangerous materials. When Sarah emerged from the complex with the biological weapons secured, she found herself facing a scene that would have been impossible to imagine when she first arrived in Pine Valley. The remote mining site was surrounded by federal agents, military personnel, and emergency responders. Helicopters circled overhead, and the entire area had been cordoned off as a federal crime scene. Tom Bradley stood at the command post, looking overwhelmed by the transformation of his quiet jurisdiction into the center of a national security operation. When he saw Sarah walking toward him with military equipment and professional bearing that made her true identity unmistakable, his expression shifted from confusion to understanding to something that might have been betrayal. "You're not a writer," he said simply. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact that carried the weight of months of deception and friendship that had been built on lies. The hurt in his voice was more painful to Sarah than any physical wound she had ever sustained in combat. "No," Sarah replied, setting down her equipment and facing the man who had shown her such kindness. "I'm Admiral Sarah Elena Martinez, United States Navy SEALs. I've been conducting an undercover investigation of this weapons trafficking operation for the past 6 months." The assembled crowd of search and rescue volunteers, federal agents, and military personnel listened in stunned silence as Sarah's true identity was revealed. David stared at the woman who had just saved his life, trying to reconcile the quiet hiking companion with the elite warrior who had single-handedly neutralized a major criminal organization. Elena approached through the crowd, escorted by federal agents, but clearly determined to confront Sarah directly. Her face showed a complex mixture of emotions: gratitude for being rescued, betrayal at the deception, and growing understanding of the impossible position Sarah had been placed in. Everything was a lie? Elena asked, her voice carefully controlled, but carrying years of friendship and trust that had been shattered. Sarah met her friend's eyes directly. My name is real. My feelings for this community are real. The friendship we built is real. The mission that brought me here was classified, but nothing else about my life in Pine Valley was false. The federal operation continued around them as Sarah provided detailed briefings on the criminal network, the seized weapons, and the biological materials that had been recovered. Her intelligence would lead to arrests across 3 continents and prevent terrorist attacks that could have killed thousands of innocent people. From a military perspective, the mission was an unprecedented success. But as Sarah watched Tom coordinate with federal agents, Elena provide medical assistance to agents who had been injured in the operation, and David reunite with his family who had driven up from town, she realized that her personal life had been utterly destroyed by her professional success. The people of Pine Valley would eventually understand the necessity of her deception, and they would appreciate that her mission had protected not just their community, but countless others around the world. But the trust that had made their friendships so precious could never be fully restored. Sarah had saved their lives, but in doing so, she had lost the life she had found among them. As helicopters prepared to evacuate Sarah and the seized materials, Tom approached her one final time. "Will we see you again?" he asked, and despite everything, there was hope in his voice. Sarah looked out over the mountains that had become home, toward the town where she had discovered parts of herself she never knew existed. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "My next assignment will probably take me far from here. But this place, these people, they've changed me. Whatever comes next, I'll carry Pine Valley with me." Elena stepped forward and, despite everything, embraced Sarah warmly. "You protected us," she said simply. "Not just today, but every day you were here. Thank you for that, Admiral Martinez." As Sarah's helicopter lifted off from Pine Valley, she looked down at the community that had given her so much. The fall festival decorations were still hanging in the town square, a reminder of the normal life she had briefly experienced and would probably never have again. But she had learned something invaluable during her time undercover. She wasn't just a weapon in service of her country. She was a person capable of love, friendship, and belonging. The mission was complete, but Sarah's real journey was just beginning. Admiral Sarah Elena Martinez returned to her official duties, but she carried with her the knowledge that somewhere in the mountains, there was a community of people who had seen her not as a decorated officer or an elite operative, but simply as Sarah, their friend. That knowledge would sustain her through whatever missions lay ahead, and remind her always of what she was truly fighting to protect.